Traditional masculinity is under attack, and Lewis here is far from the only man who thinks so. Last year, Ipsos and the Global Institute for Women's Leadership published the results of a global survey on attitudes towards gender bias. And for the most part, US attitudes were in line with global averages, with US men being slightly more sexist. But one question stood out. And that was this statement, that traditional masculinity was under threat today, and suddenly the US is getting top scores. In fact, almost half of men, 45%, were in agreement. But the very statement, traditional masculinity is under threat today, is begging the question, because it makes three assumptions: that masculinity is traditional, that it's not always been under threat, and that there's a singular historic masculinity. Now, I covered briefly in my last video that men traditionally identified themselves through manhood, but that was abandoned in the 18th and 19th century for masculinity due to a male identity crisis. So then what about assumption number two, that it's suddenly under attack? So Paul Ferry is a doctorate researcher at the University of Calgary, and on Twitter he likes to post headlines like this and then include historical clippings from newspapers to show that these ideas are not new. And the idea that masculinity is under attack, that men are too feminine and women too masculine, is an idea that has been true throughout the 21st century, as well as the 20th century, the turn of the 20th century, all the way to the 19th century. And look, it's no surprise that it goes all the way back to, but not earlier than, the point at which men abandoned their identity through manhood, opting for masculinity instead. So what about assumption number three, that historically there's been a singular masculinity? Well, with history, we have to keep in mind that the majority of it was predominantly written by wealthy Europeans, but that is far from the only perspective. In US history alone, there are centuries of Latino American traditions, and these come with multiple definitions of masculinity, such as machismo and caballerismo. Apologies to the Spanish speakers. There's also centuries of African American and Asian American traditions. There's thousands of years of Native and Jewish traditions. And even if we say that we're only going to talk about Europeans, Irish, Dutch, Italian, each have unique cultural differences about how they view men. So to say traditional masculinity is under attack today is a completely wrong sentence. Instead, there are a near infinite number of masculinities that men have feared the feminization of from the instant they abandoned the bedrock of manhood and having their identity tied to their reputation for the flimsy self-projection of masculinity. And if you feel your identity is under relentless attack, maybe don't base it on a concept so fragile that it shatters the instant you sit down to pee or paint your nails. Maybe re-establish your identity validated by reputation for the things you produce, your principles, for the way that you look after and care for your neighborhood and the community around you.